If you were watching this channel for a while now, you would probably know that I am a War Thunder gamer myself. I have been playing the game for quite some time now, and taken my time off. I've been playing pretty casually here and there. I do stream it every single day now. I've picked it up more as a full-time game that I am actually enjoying a lot more. Less so than one that I just stop by and play here and there, maybe once a fortnight. It's now an everyday thing, and I've been really enjoying it. But there is one thing that I think everyone can agree is a pretty hot button, contentious content piece that was added to the game, and that is helicopters. I touched on this a little bit during my stream last week, but nevertheless, I wanted to talk about it here in a little bit more of a concise manner. Talk about why I think that these additions to the game are perhaps really bad for the game in a lot of ways, and are just another way that, in my opinion at least, allowing them is just netting Gaijin more money and making the experience of playing this game a pretty miserable one in comparison to what it would be if that was not implemented into the battles. So for starters, I am a ground RB main. Yes, I'm coming from a ground RB player's perspective. Obviously, I understand that our fly boys out there might be a little bit different when it comes to their opinion on this, right? I understand. But nevertheless, let's talk quickly about, I guess, the two different types of helicopter loadouts you can have. I'm going to break this down into very simplistic terms because I don't want to be rambling too much. So, usually speaking, there are two types of helicopter spawns. There is the light payload, the heavy payload. Usually, the light payload is rockets. Heavy payload is, air-to-ground missiles. The light payload is something that you can usually spawn off rip straight into the start of the game. The heavy payload, you usually have to, play like more of a CAS experience where you're spawning into the mid game, spawning into the late game of a match, and it's a very different experience, right? But I think that overall, usually speaking, there is one of these two that most players will say is actually fine and won't hate for some reason, and then there is always one where they will always hate it. I don't know what it is, but for whatever reason, most players don't hate both or love both. They usually hate one or the other, and then don't mind or are indifferent about the other. So let's start with the light payload. The light payload is the one that comes out first anyway. So let's start with that. Light payload, rockets, heli rush. It's kind of the way you play it, right? You spawn in, you fly across the battlefield, you try and take out as many people as you can with rockets, hit them where it hurts, and do some really devastating plays. Usually speaking, this is the highest risk, highest reward possible play style for helicopters. And I think that is the reason why the majority of players defend this as being the okay option. In my eyes, I think that it's equally as bad, but we will get into why. The reason why people defend it is mainly because, like I said, high risk, high reward. There's a very good chance that you might just die before doing anything, or if you do manage to get a kill, or a couple of kills, or a couple of assists, or whatever, you will most likely die immediately after. Now, this is 110% true, but I don't think that it is a positive. I think that's still a negative. Hear me out now. When it comes to heli rushing, there are obviously two parties involved, right? There is the helicopter pilot, and then there's the tank that is getting shot at. Usually speaking, if the risk pays off and you get a kill, you're killing some schmuck in their, Leopard 2A4 or whatever have you, and absolutely pulverizing them full of rockets, getting a kill. They have barely left their spawn, most likely. They're probably halfway to the battlefield, halfway to the center of the map. You've just murdered them, and they've got to rinse, repeat, start the game off basically at a late spawn and with half the spawn points that they had at the start of the game. So they basically get one life to really do anything, and if they fail that, they're just out of the game. And obviously rocking up to the battlefield when the battle is already half over, which is basically what ends up happening to them, is more likely for them to just die immediately and then have an incredibly negative play experience because, usually speaking, there is not a whole lot they could have done. The people that die to these heli rushes are usually the ones that don't have the elevation or necessarily the ability to see it coming as much. And so they just get absolutely annihilated with no retort available to them, no counterplay available to them, other than hoping to God they're not the one that gets murdered. Whereas obviously the other players on the team will be further back, potentially able to kill the helicopter in return. So it's usually an alchemical trade, perfectly balanced, equivalent exchange type vibe. But it's never equivalent exchange for the person that died, because that basically just takes them out of the game for the entire game as well. Not even okay, well, they just respawn and come back. Usually it becomes a pretty detrimental blow. And then if we talk about it from a standpoint of the risk doesn't pay off, when the risk doesn't pay off, it's still the same, right? The helicopter player then is spawned in, flown across the battlefield, done nothing, gotten immediately shot out and killed, and now spawns in with half the amount of spawn points, a late spawn, and is basically out of the game. So not only is the risk basically saying, if I spawn in a light payload helicopter, fly across the battlefield, die, and then that's it, I'm more than likely going to end up having to cost a life and a player for my team because I'm not going to be able to come back into the battle necessarily as easily. Obviously, that was all up to player's skill and also luck. Very heavy emphasis on luck, but nevertheless, you're probably making your team a player down if the risk fails. And then if the risk is a success, you are potentially making the enemy team multiple players down or one player down at the very minimum for the rest of the battle as well. And that can just be really unfun. And a lot of people will say, okay, we'll just play CAS. Not CAS, sorry, AA, just like you would with CAS. But the problem is, CAS comes out in the middle of the game, just like the heavier payload helicopters. You don't want to be spawning in a CAS vehicle early on in the game because there is a more than likely a chance where you could spawn in and no helicopters arrive whatsoever, and all of a sudden you're in a useless vehicle which neuters you anyway and causes you to essentially just lose your AA, which you usually only run one of, early on in the battle, and then when you do need it in the mid to late game, there is none. And you've lost that opportunity, and you've just got to rely on your teammates. This is just a massive problem overall that I think makes the light payload helicopters just so bad for the game and makes ground RB really, really miserable. The second option is the one that I think more people hate, to be honest, and that is the heavy payload ATGMs that spawn in the mid to late game after people have gotten some kills or caps. These are probably the most devastating of the two, I would agree as well. The way this works and the reason why they're so bad is helicopters, unlike planes, are much more discreet, are able to fly low altitude with a lot more control, a lot more precision, and are able to hide behind mountains, buildings, hills, even to some degree, right? Like forests, if there's like a clearing or something like that, they might be able to sneak away with something like that. But nevertheless, they're able to hide behind obscuring terrain and then use their ability to pop up and pop back down to essentially snipe out enemy vehicles using these long-range ATGMs pretty effectively. The problem with them is you can't really fight back against them. They are a negative play experience, again, because they are essentially a situation of you either kill them with an AA or with CAS. The problem with killing them with an AA is that you don't know where they're going to be because they have the entirety of a 360 around the entire map to get you. You are a ground vehicle. You are locked inside the confines of the map. They are not. And when you're locked inside the confines of the map, you have to suffer the same fate, which is that you are, for all intensive purposes, in the location that they know, right? They know where you are, you don't know where they are, and more so even because you're an AA, they know that you're probably in this in your own spawn and not out in the middle of the map because you're an AA and you can't really fight against MBTs and heavy tanks and all this other stuff. So you're going to be hiding most likely in your spawn point. So they know exactly where you are. They know exactly how to scout you, how to spot you, how to see you, and then how to kill you without you being able to detect them. Because they can fly under radar, they can hit you. By the time you know that they're there, they'll already have an ATGM flying towards you and you will die. The only answer to them is CAS, and even then, CAS can be a bit tricky to kill them if they're a good helicopter pilot. Obviously, there is argue to say, well, then just be better at planes, but nevertheless, that is a huge deal as well. Overall, though, I really do think that both options are awful for the game, and I do think that they really need to be relegated to helicopters in a sort of PvE setting, or their own helicopter PvP could be created, but I don't think that they should be in ground battles. They do not add anything to ground battles. They only make it worse and make it more of a miserable experience. A lot of people already complain about CAS because it is still an incredibly frustrating thing having to rely on teammates and whatnot to spawn into counter CAS or to spawn into AAs and potentially get kills. And there is obviously so many problems with that as is. Adding an extra layer to that by adding, a helicopter into the mix, causing a lot of problems, especially if you get a incredibly skilled, level 100 colonel from Battlefield 3 piloting a fucking helicopter. It's going to be a whole nother problem and raise a whole slew of PTSD for anyone that played that game. Nevertheless, I hope you guys understand what I mean. Please do let me know if you think that I am just incredibly uncultured in the way of the helicopter and you think that they are perfectly fine and that they should be allowed in every single thing whatsoever. Make them cheaper, make them better, make them stronger, all that sort of jazz. Or if you think that I'm right and they should be removed, please do let me know. Please do leave a subscribe and a like. It does help me grow further. If you want to see more content like this, please do let me know. Suggest something. I'm happy to talk about it. I'm happy to discuss it. Nevertheless, much love, have a nice day, and I will see you very soon. Check out the live streams, by the way.